Welcome everyone. This is the first session of a series called A Just Global Order. I want to acknowledge first of all that I'm speaking from the unceded territory of the Lekwungen and Wasanich people, and I'm grateful for the peoples who have cared for these lands for countless generations. The University of Victoria offers the first degree in the world on Indigenous law, and we have much to gain from the insights of First Peoples who consider how our decisions affect all our relations, not just our people relations, but plants and animals, the mountains and rivers, as well as the people. If you're watching this with a group, I hope you'll discuss the questions at the end of the recording and submit comments and questions on the YouTube channel. Our team will try to respond to those. Those of you who are registered for the live sessions will be able to join breakout rooms for discussions before a final plenary in each session. And those who are registered receive my teaching notes and references as well. To register, you have to go to Eventbrite, and that link is at the end of this video. This course is based on an amazing book called Global Governance and the Emergence of Global Institutions in the 21st Century. This is a 550-page book, and it's on the website of the Cambridge University Press as a free download, so you don't have to buy it. You can download it, and I did that. I downloaded it and printed it up, double-sided, and then I took it in 4 sections to my print shop and asked them to coil bind it for me, and that turned out to be really brilliant, and you'll see why in a minute. So I remember watching a whole morning webinar just on this book at the UN celebrations for the 75th anniversary, which was in November of 2020. And the professor who was moderating the session held up the book to the camera, only he had the big fat book, and said, "I love this book. I used up 3 highlighter pens reading this book." And that's why I think it's great to print it up yourself, because mine's all filled with my notes and comments throughout. So I'm also grateful to have a group of friends who studied the book with me, or I studied it with them. They are Sheila Flood, Sharon Welsh, Jonathan Down, and Michael Truman, and Jim Flood has handled the technical side of this. So it took us months to go through the book, to read and reread chapters and talk about the implications of each of the solutions that were in the book. Finally, we decided that we had to share it with others, and we're now a task force to bring these inspiring ideas to different communities. I call this session The UN We Love. I have to say, I don't think that we knew when we started how much we would turn out to love the UN, because we didn't know all of the things that it has accomplished in 75 years. Like, it's not on the front page of the paper. It is an unprecedented organization. There are 193 nation states that get together to talk rationally most of the time about how to solve global issues. About in 2007, I spoke to a peace conference. I'd just written a book about nonviolent success stories that had prevented or ended war, and so I was doing lots of book tours. And as I did, I would go to peace conferences to talk about these nonviolent solutions. So at this one, I said to the people as they came into the hall, there were about 300 people, and I said, if you believe that we will get rid of war someday, please stand by this wall. And if you think we will never get rid of war, go to this wall. And what happened was about 15 people went to this wall, and that meant about 285 went to this wall. So that indicates a world view. What I found after that, I was kind of curious, so I did that at many different sessions, and these were peace organizations. I did this many times over, always with the same result. A few people who think we'll get rid of war, and a huge majority who don't. So it's significant that these were all peace conferences, and yet all these people attend a peace conference to talk about how to prevent war, how to end war, and yet they don't believe that we can do it in a final sense. So the worldview that is represented there is one that is held pretty well uniformly around the world, and that's the worldview that human beings are inherently violent and that domination by force is an inevitable human drive. Well, we know now that that's simply not true. We know through science that that worldview is incomplete. We are hardwired to be cooperative, to care for one another, to love. We know how much now, from being isolated, we know how much we hate isolation. But our attention is drawn to conflict, excitement, and tragedy. But our deepest need is for connection. Today I could ask you if you think we can create a system of world governance that would be fair, just, and effective, that would act for the common good, that would put the environment, human rights, and social justice above profit. And I'm guessing that many of you would be skeptical or mistrustful that we would ever achieve it, so you'd be on this wall of we won't ever get there. And we have good reason for being mistrustful. Leaders have betrayed our trust again and again. Leaders of government, of corporations, even of religions, have acted in unbridled self-interest. But here we are together, facing a world in crisis. And we know we may not survive climate catastrophe. Unstable leaders may unleash a nuclear war with, fire and fury such as the world has never seen. We know that COVID-19 may mutate and come back to us in a more deadly form, and our global financial institutions may collapse in the chaos. But here we are together, because something tells us that love is stronger than hate, and if we pull together, we will make a difference. We sure need a roadmap. This course is not a condensed version of the book, although if you want that, the preface gives you that overview, and it's only 4 pages long. And I think you've read it before you came to see this. Instead, the course is designed to encourage you to engage with the principles raised in the book as if you are our citizen representative at the UN. I do suggest homework for between the sessions. It's not arduous homework. It's usually a film that's too long to fit into a session. Sometimes it's a short reading. You won't lose marks if you don't do the homework, but the discussions of the homework will be so much richer if you have done the preparation. So the first topic is about disintegration and integration. The world is facing these two forces at the same time. One is propelling us to the degeneration, disintegration of institutions, the destruction of our planet, and privileging profit over humanity. In this direction, we have difficulty discerning truth from lies, and hope is hard to find. The other direction is toward building an advancing civilization based on higher values of honesty, trustworthiness, and compassion, where science is respected and there's a commitment to the common good. All of this combined with respect for diversity, human rights, and dignity. Well, we're going to focus on the integrative vision of the future for the next 6 weeks. In February 2003, the US and the UK decided to start a second war on Iraq, and millions of people around the world went into the streets to protest this new war. The protests continued not just for that weekend, but for months, and one French academic has estimated a total of 36 million people protested the war. The New York Times wrote, "The fracturing of the Western alliance over Iraq and the huge anti-war demonstrations around the world this weekend are reminders that there may still be two superpowers on the planet, the United States and world public opinion. World public opinion is expressed by civil society." Just explain that a bit. I see it as, and this comes from work by Nicanor Perlas, there are 3 pillars of a successful society: government, the economy, and civil society. Civil society expresses the conscience that holds government and economy to account. And it also expresses culture. Civil society is not just the non-governmental organizations or NGOs that protest. It is churches, community groups, schools, universities, people like us getting together to explore new ideas. So, as you know, we didn't succeed in stopping the war in Iraq, but we did show the strong public opposition to war and our determination to have a voice in the future. We'll see the growing importance of the role of women in civil society in bringing conscience to government and the economy as we explore the achievements of the UN in the past 75 years. Most of us are oblivious to the successes of the United Nations because our media focus on violent conflict and tragedy. You know, our worldview is shaped by what we surround ourselves with, what we watch, what we listen to, what we talk about in our homes. And massive profits feed the media giants who have the mantra, if it bleeds, it leads. That's why the headline of the newspapers is usually something violent or shocking. So let's imagine people exhausted by the Second World War coming together to found the United Nations in 1942 to 45. And we can feel the high ideals that infused the organization. I want to read to you a really short part from the preamble of the UN Charter, because I was once at a conference where someone said, do you have an inspiring quotation to start this little talk or this section? And this man pulled this out of his wallet. He carries this with him. We, the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime has brought untold sorrow to mankind, and to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, in the equal rights of men and women and of nations large and small, and to establish conditions under which justice and respect for the obligations arising from treaties and other sources of international law can be maintained, and to promote social progress and better standards of life and larger freedom. And for these ends, to practice tolerance and live together in peace with one another as good neighbors, and to unite our strength to maintain international peace and security, and to ensure by the acceptance of principles and the institution of methods that armed force shall not be used, save in the common interest. Save in the common interest. And to employ international machinery for the promotion of economic and social advancement of all peoples. And for these ends, have resolved to combine our efforts to accomplish these aims. So here's one of the first real triumphs of the United Nations, and that is developing and signing the Declaration of Human Rights. This is Eleanor Roosevelt holding up the declaration that was signed in 1948. And there is a link at the end of this video to the video of Eleanor Roosevelt pulling that effort together. Don't miss it. It's just a great story. I wanted to show you some of the triumphs, the successes and achievements of the United Nations under just a few headings to give you an idea. So the first one is health. The World Health Organization was founded in 1945 with the UN, and one of its huge successes was the eradication of smallpox. Smallpox was the most terrible, terrible disease, had existed for, I guess, forever, but we know of it from the Bible, and we know of it being used in, I guess, as germ warfare by settlers who infected blankets with smallpox and gave them to First Nations people. It killed millions and millions of people in the world year after year. But when people began to be vaccinated in the 20th century, and then WHO was founded and those vaccinations were really enhanced and speeded up, we began to see smallpox disappearing from many, many countries except for the very heavily populated poorer countries, and India was the last one. They did tracking of contacts and then vaccinating everyone in communities where there had been smallpox until the final person was in India, and that person and all of the community were given the vaccination, and then smallpox had disappeared. So in my lifetime, of course, I have a scar from getting the smallpox vaccination. Anybody who grew up before 1970 probably has that, but our children don't have it, and babies don't have to be vaccinated against smallpox now. We've almost eradicated polio. Excuse me, the role of civil society in the campaign to eliminate polio is really, really important, because Rotary International took this on as their major project around the world. They raised $5 billion to promote the eradication of polio, and it's almost all gone now. There are two little pools, I think, where they haven't been able to get in and make sure that everyone is immunized. Average life expectancy in 1960 was 52 years. In 2016, it's 72 years, so 20 years longer. The rule of law is an amazing achievement as well, and I want to stress that sometimes, although we don't have means to enforce laws and treaties, it's really important to note that countries obey the laws and treaties that they sign, by and large. There are a few exceptions, but generally speaking, when they join these treaties, they respect them. The first one is the International Court of Justice, which was set up by the UN in 1945. This is the court where countries can go to resolve things like territorial claims. However, the ICJ does not have the power of enforcement, so it can give its adjudication, its opinion, but it's up to the countries involved whether or not they obey the judgment of the court. So that's a weakness that has to be changed as we improve global order. The next one is the International Criminal Court, and this one I love because it just came into effect in 2002, and I remember being at a conference where people were working toward the implementation of the International Criminal Court, and I remember one of them saying, "Oh, this will probably take 100 years, but we'll work on it." And in a very short time, it came into effect. Again, not only did civil society promote it, but judges and lawyers around the world also did. The crime of aggression is under the International Criminal Court, and it just came into effect in 2017. So these two have changed everything for world leaders in terms of wars and starting wars. The first one, the International Criminal Court, was the first time that a leader who committed genocide, war crimes, or crimes against humanity would be held personally liable. Up until that time, leaders were always immune to prosecution. Now they're not. The crime of aggression is the same, but the crime of aggression is the first act that starts a war or a violent exchange. So an example of the crime of aggression, which is now a war crime, would be if a leader orders a drone attack to assassinate someone in a different country. That is a crime of aggression, and that can be prosecuted at the International Criminal Court, but only if it were perpetrated after 2017, when the court came into effect. I'll talk more about those later. UN nation-building initiatives. The RAND Corporation investigated these initiatives because there's a fair amount of talk that the UN was ineffective, but in fact, the RAND Corporation, which is fairly conservative, found that 67% of those initiatives have been successful, so that's really important. The UN supported decolonization, and as a result, the number of member nations increased to 193 countries today from 51 at the beginning. Nation building includes providing security, helping to establish government institutions after war, police services, agriculture, economic development, and education. And also they engage with civil society to provide observers for elections, where elections are being held in countries that have not previously had a democracy. Disarmament is my field, and these are wonderful achievements. Biological weapons were banned early, chemical weapons after that. Chemical weapons have unfortunately been used. Recently they were used in Syria, but the outraged world forced the president to sign the chemical weapons ban treaty at that point and destroy all of his chemical weapons stores. Landmines and cluster bombs were banned, and that's a really landmark effort because it began with civil society coming together to propose that there should be a treaty for the elimination of landmines. And civil society then cooperated with the government of Canada, particularly Lloyd Axworthy, who was our Minister of Foreign Affairs at the time. And Lloyd Axworthy invited like-minded nations to come to Ottawa to discuss landmines and design a treaty. And that process is now called the Ottawa process because it took place with a collaboration with civil society outside the United Nations structure. So that was a huge success. The next one was the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. That came into force in 2021 in January the 21st, and the role of civil society here was huge. The Norwegian government and civil society worked together to educate delegates about the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons and nuclear war. So I'm going to talk more about this again in the session on peace and disarmament. But the role of civil society, again, has been enormous. In fact, civil society won the Nobel Peace Prize for this one. Declarations and conventions, I'll mention only two, the Rights of the Child, Convention on the Rights of the Child, and Convention on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And we may think that these are just feel-good things that we sign and don't do anything about, but the province of BC adopted the rights of Indigenous people in 2019. The legislation sets out a process to align BC's laws with the UN Declaration. It mandates government to bring provincial laws into harmony with the UN Declaration. It requires development of an action plan to achieve this alignment over time, providing transparency and accountability. This, of course, arose from the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women. I'll continue. And it requires regular reporting to the legislature to monitor progress. In addition, the legislation allows for flexibility for the province to enter into agreements with a broader range of Indigenous governments, and it provides a framework for decision-making between Indigenous governments and the province on matters that impact their citizens. Really, really an important step, and very challenging for government and the First Nations to actually implement this. There has been an enormous decrease in extreme poverty in the 75 years with the United Nations. The UN's 2013 Human Development Report concluded that the proportion of people living in extreme income poverty worldwide plunged 43% in 1990 to 22% in 2008, including more than 500 million people lifted from poverty in China alone. In terms of the improvement in labor standards, we don't really think of these as being a global issue, but the International Labour Organization is a part of the UN, and goal number 8 of the Sustainable Development Goals says, promoting jobs and enterprise, guaranteeing rights at work, extending social protections, and promoting social dialogue are the 4 pillars of the ILO Decent Work Agenda, with gender as a cross-cutting theme. And in terms of literacy, literacy grew from 42% around the world in 1960 to 86% in 2015. I'm afraid that all of these tremendous strides may be lost as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we're going to have to work very hard to restore the world. Finally, I'd like to say that the world has changed dramatically over 75 years, and the UN, as it is structured, is not able to address the global scale of threats to our survival. Climate emergency, pandemics, war, financial collapse are only 4. The major obstacles are that it's an organization of nation states, not we the peoples. Secondly, the General Assembly does not have legislative and enforcement power. That goes to the Security Council. And the 5 permanent members of there's 15 members, the 5 permanent members of the Security Council are the United States, United Kingdom, France, Russia, and China. They have veto power. And the result of that is that there's always one of the great powers involved in wars around the world. So they veto discussions that would prevent or end those wars. And as a result, we've had some 200 wars since 1945. The United Nations has achieved monumental results in many fields, but perhaps its greatest achievement is the transformation of global norms and expectations about justice, human rights, and the need to cooperate across borders. I'm just going to read you a quotation from Jonathan Schell. Jonathan Schell wrote a wonderful book called The Fate of the Earth. Our present system and the institutions that make it up are the debris of history. They have become inimical to life. They constitute a noose around the neck of mankind, threatening to choke off the human future. But we can cut the noose and break free. To suppose otherwise would be to set up a false, fictitious fate, molded out of our own weaknesses and our own alterable decisions. I'm going to close with this slide from Dag Hammarskjöld, who was the 2nd Secretary General of the United Nations and a very, very highly regarded Danish man. He wrote this: "The principles of the Charter are by far greater than the organization in which they are embodied, and the aims which they are to safeguard are holier than the policies of any single nation or people." So in your discussion, in your groups, I hope that you'll think of this question, and I'm sure that the discussions will be wide-ranging. Think of the issue that you're most concerned about, and knowing that one nation cannot solve it, what is needed at the global level to advance solutions on this issue? I also have a question. What do you think would be the role of faith communities in advancing a just global order? The video of Eleanor Roosevelt on the YouTube channel in the comments, and the homework for the next session is to watch the National Film Board movie called 1919. It's the history of the discussions in Versailles that led to the Treaty of Versailles at the end of the First World War, and it's really, really fascinating. Even as I watch it for the 2nd and 3rd time, I'm thinking, this is why we're where we are. So I do hope you'll watch that, and we'll see you again in a week.